As we begin today, and before I call together our presenters on screen, I just want to acknowledge the significance of conversations like this today. 401 years ago, to this day, August 20th, 1619, historians note the arrival of the first enslaved Africans in British colonies. This is recognized as the beginning of slavery. Yet at the same time, we recognize that the words that are reflected even in the title of this session, Justice for All, have been spoken for generations, yet struggles have existed for generations. Today, we are talking about justice for all, and we're pausing to consider the issue with a racial equity lens. There is work to be done, and there are blind spots that continue to exist. Yet there are bright spots that shine in our community. And with me today are three of those individuals that not only serve as bright spots, but continue to fan the flame of good work that's happening both as individuals and as organizations. They continue to shine the light on issues, on challenges, and opportunities. And for that, I know that I am grateful, as is the Community Foundation. So let's begin with some brief introductions of three individuals today who are part of our panel. So I'm gonna ask Tom to turn on the video screens for Betty Andrews, who is with the Iowa-Nebraska NAACP, Isaiah Knox, who is with Urban Dreams, and also Cheryl Hayes, who's with the Let's Talk program, an initiative launched by Amos. So I'm waiting, here we go. We have Cheryl on. So thanks again to the three of you for joining us and challenging us, which I think is just as important as the conversation. So I'm gonna start, Tom, if you could please pull up our slides. And we're gonna start with just inviting Isaiah to share a little bit about the work of Urban Dreams, and then we'll certainly dive deeper as we go on this morning. Isaiah?
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Isaiah Knox, Executive Director of Urban Dreams, and that was the Executive Director before Wayne Ford and I, as the transition happened successfully just a couple years ago. So I am the second Executive Director in an organization that's been around since 1985. When Wayne started the organization, it was really to deal with the open drug trade, prostitution, high crime rate in the area where we've been since 1985 on 6th and Forest. We have now evolved from there to become a full service outpatient substance abuse treatment center, a full food pantry, a full-time LISW, which is a mental health counselor on staff, a workforce development organization, and an educational organization. Part of the things we also do is that small picture down there is our community connectivity, where we really try to get community, police, we try to get them out of their car to have positive interactions with communities that they serve, and then fun, educational, free events right there in the neighborhood north of the interstate.
There's so much work that Isaiah and his team at Urban Dreams leads, and you got a little flavor of it by just all the different programs that he referenced. So certainly are going to dive in deeper with you, Isaiah, on some of this great work on the ground in the communities that you serve. So with that, I think we go next to Cheryl, if I believe is, yes, perfect. So Cheryl Hayes, I'm going to invite you to share a little bit more about Let's Talk and the work that you do as part of the Amos initiative.
Hello, everyone. As she said, my name is Cheryl. Amos, which is a Mid-Iowa organizing strategy, we hold house meetings to find out what keeps people up at night. And back in 2013, we found out at several of those meetings that it had something to do with disproportionality, whether that was profiling or issues in the community or issues in the school. We started a juvenile research team to find out what we could do to be part of that solution. And Let's Talk was started to address the disproportionate number of students of color that were being either referred to the juvenile system or were receiving out-of-school suspensions. We use restorative justice practices like circles and mediations And we just want kids to know that they have a voice, that they're valued, and that they're intelligent enough to work through whatever their issues are. We've conducted peace circles between police and youth of color. We've had circles with parents who were in conflict, parents and administration and police. We've had all kinds of different circles just to let people know there is a way to work through a lot of the things that are going on. What our ultimate goal is to stop the school to prison pipeline.
Great, thank you, Cheryl, so much. And you used a word that might be new to some folks around restorative justice practices. So later on this morning, I think we'll have a conversation about what that can do in a community. And I know there will be several comments and thoughts about what that looks like in practice. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, next let's bring on Betty Andrews to share a little bit about the work of the Iowa-Nebraska NAACP. Thanks again, Betty, for joining us as well.
Thanks so much, Angela. I'm happy to be here. Thanks to you and Sarah and the Community Foundation for inviting me. Yes, I'm Betty Andrews. I'm the president of the Iowa-Nebraska NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. We are an organization that seeks to eliminate race-based discrimination, and we do that in areas of education. These are areas that we call our game changers, so education, economics, criminal justice, political action, health, and we also work strongly to lift up our youth. The Iowa-Nebraska NAACP is about 30 units of the organization. So not only in Des Moines, but throughout the state, we have various units. And then our work that we do at the state level is strongly rooted in working on policy changes and law changes that make, that actually shore up reduce the discrimination and reduce disparities. So that's what we have been working on very strongly since our beginning, way back in 1909, and we continue to work on this.
Wonderful, thanks Betty so much. I know that a lot of the work that you've done over the years and decades has resulted in some progress and certainly a lot more opportunity that you'll share with us today. The flow of the conversation today, first we're going to start with a little bit of data and reflection, and Betty has been gracious enough to help tee this conversation up with some data and also some more information about the work of the Iowa-Nebraska NAACP. So we'll start with Betty sharing that, and then we'll take some time to talk about why and what's happening on the ground. And then again, as I referenced at the beginning, really talking about some bright spots in our community where we'll reflect on opportunities like restorative justice models and other trainings and work on the ground to make a change. So with that, Betty, I'll invite you to share maybe the most presentation heavy portion of today, and then we'll get into the conversation. So thanks again. And I believe Tom will give you control to move your slides.
All right, thanks again. Okay. So I appreciate this opportunity. One of the things that I consider an eye-opener in my life was back in about 2008 when I discovered that Iowa ranked #1 in the nation for over-incarcerating African Americans. And those numbers were for every one Caucasian person per capita in the criminal justice system, there were about 14 African American people incarcerated in the criminal justice system. That was a huge wake-up call for me, and it really stemmed a passion for me in terms of addressing that. And one of the things that I vowed to do was to change that. And in my role, at that time I wasn't president of the NAACP, but in that role, that's why we are so deep in terms of passion. This is my passion. So I wanted to start out with that and just kind of let people know that passion is sparked by situations of this nature. I talked a little bit already about the NAACP. We celebrated 111 years in 2020, and we continue to be focused on the areas that I mentioned before: economics, healthcare, education, voter empowerment, and criminal justice, etc. So the urgency of now. So when I think about the urgency of now, I think we are currently in the situation where we have seen, and it's quite visible in this moment, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, and of course also my nephew, who is Emmanuel Ellis, who also his death has been declared a homicide at the hands of the Tacoma, Washington police this year. So this is a personal history, and it's personal for many African Americans that are connected to these issues. So I always like to start just in kind of taking a moment to think about the urgency of now. And if that wasn't enough, certainly that urgency extends. So it's not just those four people, it's also a number of people that you see here on your screen, but this has been going on since 1619. So in terms of criminal justice, which is my passion, I wanted to share these stats with you. And these are stats that I share pretty much wherever I'm speaking, but it gives us the opportunity to put this in perspective. So when you're talking about people who are justice involved in the criminal justice system, we have to look at how there is such a great disparity. So for African Americans, we're 13% of the national population, but we're 30% of people arrested. We're 41% of people in jail. We're 49% of those people that are incarcerated. And so one of the things that I always lift up is that we are in crisis. I know we've experienced the pandemic. Some people may call it a double pandemic with the racial unrest as well. But the truth is we have been in crisis for a very long time. And although it's challenging, the one thing that the death of George Floyd did do was put a spotlight on this crisis. Particularly in Iowa, 1 out of every 12 African Americans is currently in prison or on parole or probation. Again, we're 4% of the population in Iowa, but yet make up 26% of the prison population. And that is really discouraging. When you think about also that we are 30% of the felony convictions in the state of Iowa, and when we look at, again, the numbers I talked about before, that the ratio back in 2007 was 14-1 in terms of Blacks to whites in our prison system. That is a disparaging number. It always had me asking the question, are the African Americans in Iowa worse than African Americans elsewhere? Why do we rank so high, exponentially higher? And then of course, currently, due to some of the work that has been happening, as of 2016, that number has been reduced. And I always say it's not necessarily a reason to celebrate, but at least we're pointing to the right direction. So now that number is for every one white person per capita, there are 11 African Americans in the criminal justice system, which I note is a slight improvement. We now rank number 3 in the nation for that stat. And then also just going back, Blacks are arrested at a rate of about a little over 8 times higher than whites when it comes to marijuana possession. Blacks are arrested at 7 times a higher rate for overall drugs. And then when they're arrested, they're more likely to have their vehicle searched. So this, despite the fact that African Americans and whites use drugs generally at the same level. So again, I emphasize that we are in crisis. And so some of the ways that the NAACP are addressing that is that we're working through our legislative agenda to deal with systemic reform and dealing with the mindset of systemic change. And of course, that involves improving law enforcement practices, eliminating racial profiling, a number of re-entry measures, and then also ensuring the right to vote permanently. We did recently receive a victory in that area. NAACP has been leading that fight for a number of years. And so we're grateful that Executive Order number 7 was signed, which is granting about 40 to 50,000 Iowans who have a past, and I would want to emphasize a past criminal conviction, that they are now able to vote. And of course, we're working towards sentencing reforms and addressing the wealth gap and removing educational disparities. This is the signing of Executive Order number 7. And these are some of the other, even back to the Vilsack, I'm sorry, to the Branstad administration, we were working through this. We also work, we work with the Iowa Summit on Justice and Disparities. That is one of the signature programs that we have come up with to educate people about these issues, and then make sure that there is a platform to keep pushing for these issues. And this year, that summit is slated for October the 13th. The other thing, we work, of course, with government officials as well. And we were successful in getting our governor to appoint the Governor's Focus Committee on Criminal Justice Reform. We're dealing this round, because we had a previous round, we're dealing with reentry, and we're also dealing with an unbiased criminal justice system. Okay, and I think that that's a bit of context for you, Angie.
Great, thanks so much, Betty. Tom, if you can start. Oh, perfect. There we go. Thanks so much. I appreciate that bit of context and the reflection on some of the data. And I think it does, some of the conversations around even Cheryl's reference to interrupting the school to prison pipeline through some of the work that Let's Talk is doing. I think about Isaiah, the slate of all the services provided at Urban Dreams, and how many of those are really focused on helping individuals returning from incarceration to become active as they wish in our community, and how much it takes organizations of all sizes, both at the policy level, like yours and a lot of the work you do, Betty, to the organizations working in neighborhoods, like the work that you're helping to lead, Isaiah. And what it looks like, Cheryl, when a group of volunteers rally around voices in 2013 to understand that activating committed volunteers, Let's Talk is a volunteer-run program, can start making some changes in a space that at times seems almost impossible. So after listening to that, I'd love to just open it up to the three of you to just reflect on some of the challenges that you see play out in the lives of our neighbors that Betty helped frame with data. But what does it look like on the ground? What do we need to understand about what this means beyond the number?
Well, I can start with Let's Talk. What we went back, we started a research team, and as I said, we went back and looked at data of what was happening in the schools. And so we looked at data from 2010 to 2014, and we found that students of color were 2 to 3 times more likely to end up with those out-of-school suspensions and with referrals, again, that would lead to the justice system. That also led to them not being in school. So if you're out of school on suspension, you're not learning anything that day. The other part of that is, if you have those suspensions and referrals on your record, they follow you, whether people say they do or not. A teacher may look and say, oh boy, this child has been in trouble a lot. They're going to be a troublemaker. And so that follows them, and it affects the way that student learns. we found that it also affects their value, what they feel about themselves as human beings. If I'm labeled a troublemaker, then guess what I'm going to start calling myself? A troublemaker. If I use the example a lot that I have a very loud voice, okay? It carries. And so I'm talking, but maybe somebody thinks that she's yelling at me. And we found that our African American students were getting that a lot, when in all actuality, they were just making a point. It wasn't that they were yelling at someone, it wasn't that they were trying to hurt someone's feelings, it's just expression. Well, they were getting referrals for that expression. And when we would get in our meetings with those young people, why do I get in so much trouble just when I try to use my voice or when I try to say something? How come I'm never called on? How come people think that I'm bad just because I have something to say? When the person sitting next to me can say the same thing and they're listened to. So what we do in our mediations, and I'm back to the restorative justice practices, mediations basically, say two students get into a conflict. The school calls us, and instead of those children receiving a referral or out of school suspension, we come in and we tell the kids, we believe that you're intelligent enough to work through whatever your conflict is. And we tell them, we are not going to tell you what to do, because if it's our idea, you're not going to follow through on it anyway. These young people, first of all, they're surprised that somebody in the community is coming in and listening. And listening is a big part of it. The youth decide, they may decide they're never going to speak to each other again. In this mediation, they may say, you know what, we just don't like each other. But how are you going to conduct yourself in school, in your neighborhood, etc., when you see each other? So they come up with an agreement that they're going to leave each other alone. Or they may find that whatever that issue is was not that big of an issue. Or maybe we're more alike than we thought we were. So they work through it and they say, you know what, we're going to nod at each other when we're in the hallway. We're going to smile at each other and keep it moving, or we're going to be friends again. What we have found is they just want to be listened to and not treated like second-class citizens who are not smart enough to work through what's going on.
Well, and Cheryl, something that keeps popping into my head is sort of the value of the building of community and what that means across age demographics, across community at large. And Isaiah, I think about some of the work that you're doing is really about community, right? Place-based action. You're even building a new outdoor space to allow that community to foster. So, can you reflect a little bit about, Cheryl's talking about that within the schools, bringing people together in the space to explore. Talk about what it looks like on the ground at Urban Dreams to ensure that voices rally together.
For sure. Thank you. And Cheryl, I wanted to add something as well. Is Urban Dreams does the Deferred Expulsion program with Des Moines Public Schools. So any student now that has been expelled or an expellable offense, violent offense, drugs, weapons on campus, comes to Urban Dreams, and we case manage them through either graduation or return to the traditional school, whatever traditional school will look like in the future, we don't know. But we've been super successful with that. The numbers aren't overwhelming, 28 students last year. So it's not a lot of students as we would assume with a district of 32,000 that are these high-risk students. So restorative justice is something that is very key, because that keeps them also out of the criminal justice system, or has advocates that go with them to court, to schools, and like Cheryl said, people that they trust that are from their community, people that they know, and people that go a little bit further. We do non-traditional work, right? We'll go to their house at 9 o'clock at night and knock on the door and make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do or where they're supposed to be, right? We'll make calls every single day to those students. We do a little more non-traditional work, I think, than, and that's important when you're building community and when you're building wraparound services. And that leads, I guess, to our park that we're building, right? Or now the courtyard right next to our building, which will be one of those spaces that will be beautiful in our community, where people can enjoy and feel like they are welcomed. I like to tell this story real quick. When we had and I have permission to tell this story. These are the kind of things that I think that Betty knows so well with her work with NAACP, but maybe many people on the call wouldn't quite understand, is when I had the renderings drawn for that courtyard by RDG, and I had permission to tell this story. When they showed me the renderings, in the picture only had white people in the picture. And I said, I can't take this back to my community and let them think that this is a space where they feel belonging with, and they're not pictured in that rendering. This is an Urban Dreams community courtyard. I hope you understand what that means. We've been around since 1985. They're on the corner, stayed open through the entire COVID crisis, never shut our doors. One day, the only day we closed our office was when we didn't have power just from this last crisis, the third crisis, right, that we had in this state. And they said, we don't even have any people of color in our portfolio. And they've been designing work in this community for who knows how long. And they never designed a piece of a rent for a project that had a person of color in it. So can you imagine why people in Des Moines don't feel welcome in certain places? Because they've never been into those spaces. I asked them to go out and find a folder, a portfolio, or whatever, of people of color, and they came back with a whole portfolio of people of color, a diverse group of people. And then they had some ADA compliance stuff. I said, I need people with disabilities next, right? Let's be inclusive, even in the description, how we show who we are, community. And that goes in as well. But we create an inclusive environment. And I also want to talk about another diversion program that we have, right? We have the OWI jail diversion program. We're the only statewide organization that does that. And that's another way to keep people out of the system. And as a full service outpatient substance abuse treatment center, I am legalization of marijuana because, as Betty said in the stats earlier, Black people are incarcerated or charged at a much higher rate, marijuana possession. Not a public safety issue that needs jail, it needs treatment. And we want to treat people like we do with jail diversion, like we do outpatient substance abuse treatment. And we use Prime for Life, which is a nationally recognized curriculum on those diversion programs, both OWI, and they have drug as well. As many states, I just got back from Colorado, as many states are moving towards legalization of marijuana. So that's another way to divert people from the system. And then they can't get employment. They have these criminal records that many organizations still in our community that we've been working with at Urban Dreams to go and look at your policies and say, why policy that you don't hire felons? Some of them don't understand why they have a blanket policy. Deeper and say, obviously felonies during this time frame probably work out in your organization. However, these could. And there's plenty of best out there that show if you itemize the reason why the felony doesn't fit within your organization, truck driving, right? I mean, it's probably hard to have a felony conviction of OWI, or terrorism if you're hauling chemicals that could be dangerous. So there's many reasons why you can have these exclusions, but most of them are just artificial barriers that we put up because we were scared at one point and we wanted to be very risk averse on our hiring practices, and it shut out a lot of people. And we want to work through that process with organizations to make sure that we're getting rid of those artificial barriers that are keeping people from gainful employment. Because if we have gainful employment opportunities for everybody in our community, no matter what, guess what? Crime will reduce because people can afford to, there's no stress. They can afford to pay their bills. They can have beautiful houses in communities where they want to be, and things of that nature. So that's another thing Urban Dreams has been doing on the ground, is making sure that we're working with organizations to open up gainful employment opportunities for people with criminal records, for non-traditional students or people from communities where they're often shut out because of whatever reason we've made up in our own mind.
Well, one of the things, Isaiah, that I know I've heard you reflect on, and Betty, just all the work that NAACP has done, is really digging deeper and pulling back the layers of why the situations exist, why the data is showing us what it is. And the more that we get to that core opportunity, the more that we can see places to act. And that's why I think I love, Cheryl, the work that Let's Talk has done around just simply having conversation to not only reduce expulsions or suspensions, but to increase the opportunity to engage and create relationships. And Betty, I think about how many times you've dug deeper on the why question with your work. So what reflections would you have for us to think about, why racial justice has to be used as a lens when we talk about, why racial equity has to be used as a lens in justice in that conversation?
Absolutely, and I think you hit it right on the nail in terms of the importance of the why. And the why is important for a number of reasons. There's that first question in terms of why is this happening in the first place, right? Because there's been a white supremacist mindset that our country started with. And as we have come through slavery, Jim Crow, the new Jim Crow, redlining, all of these big systemic issues, discrimination in banking, discrimination in wealth practices and things like that. Those are kind of the issues that at the state level, the NAACP deals with. We also deal, we often partner with Isaiah and the folks at Urban Dreams, our Des Moines branch does, and deal with some of the pieces that we're talking about in terms of working one-on-one, but quite often we are working at the state level in terms of looking at the policies, looking at also why is this happening? And Isaiah is absolutely right that oftentimes it is simply because it's always been. And the problem with because it's always been is because it has always been, in a country that was built on racism. And so now as we're looking at how we dismantle that racism, which is a big undertaking, it is a huge undertaking. We do have to grapple with how that works in our nation, but also in our state and in our city. So when we're looking at that, the NAACP's approach has been to take a look at some of the laws, not some of the laws, all of the laws, and see where they're driving things. And so we are evidence-based, and we want to make sure that the stats are there and that we are looking at those stats. So I think about, Isaiah brings up the issue with fair employment and fair and employment opportunity for people with felony backgrounds. I think about how the way we operate and what this looks like on the ground is something that is constantly evolving, because I remember getting our NAACPers on Capitol Hill from all across the state, getting them there, having them ready to go to speak with their legislators. We trained them about this concept of banning the box, removing the box that asks if you have been convicted of a crime from the application for the very reasons that Isaiah mentioned. We trained them on that, and we said, okay, and this is probably 4 years ago. We said, okay, we want ban the box, and go talk to your legislators about banning the box. But what we found out is all of a sudden people started coming back out, and they were like, well, Betty, these people have never even heard of a ban the box. So what we have found is that our work is important on multi-levels. I know that a lot of times people think about, what we've been seeing recently, which is important. The protests that we have seen, the work that is that people are, putting in the streets, that's important. But people don't understand that also it's about educating people. and that practice takes years. So starting several years ago on something and walking through it, that takes a long time to do. And then also, you know, the unsexy work of going to meeting after meeting to talk with legislators or corporations or those kinds of things, just to kind of walk them through and help them understand and to kind of turn the perspective. You know, we are in, and we have had a Eurocentric education system. So that is one line of perspective. So we really need to think about, well, what if that was switched and told from the side of the Native Americans whose homes were taken from them? What if that was switched and told from the side of the Japanese who were in the internment camps? What if that was switched and told from the standpoint of African Americans who have had a proverbial knee on the neck for centuries? So when we look at that, we look at the policy, we work with evidence, and we make sure that we are looking at, you know, best practices, and then we work with individuals who are key decision makers, and we continue to press that. And then we also work with the community so that they are educated and they understand what the need is and the issues that can change things and how they can change, and what do those metrics look like and those numbers. So it's kind of that upstream philosophy, going upstream and trying to stop what is causing the problem at the top instead of pulling people out of the water. But to be frank, the NAACP does both.
Well, and I think some of that too, Betty, you know, you're talking about some of those blind spots. I mean, you know, you're articulating some of the blind spots, and I think that as a community, we make assumptions about a lot of things, but I think there are several that you noted that just by pausing to reflect on that is very important. You know,
Angie, Angie, I want to just step a little deeper on the box and the felony or the employing people with felony backgrounds, because now there's this new thing, and these are the things that we have to make sure that when I say we as advocates, that's not about race or anything like that, but we have to make sure we're at the table, because now there's this new spin that that the ban the box policies are actually a bad thing, because what they are doing is allowing people to, I mean, since employers don't have the opportunity to have that box on the application, and people tell them and self-reveal that they have a past conviction, now they just exclude African Americans in general. So the way that that's been framed is that ban the box policies don't work, which is really shocking to me, because again, flipping the perspective, it's not that the policy doesn't work. What it does is it reveals a much deeper issue of racism in our country. So things like that, those are the hairs we have to split to move these things forward. So since Isaiah's been talking about that, I thought I'd carry that example to the end.
Well, and I know one of the things Isaiah continues to challenge and support me in, and he did it here today, in listing resources for all of us to dive in. You know, I think just pausing enough to reflect and challenge yourself to learn more and to dig deeper. And I know Isaiah does that consistently in our community, as you all do. And I think you're right, it's really important that we consider all lenses on those issues. You know, but nevertheless, when we see some of the data, Betty, that you shared about the state of the prison population and the state of those just even court involved that we're dealing with, that really are our neighbors of color, I do think that it demands all of us to just consider what information we have and why. Let me just see to, I want to say to the audience that if you have some questions, please feel free to share in here. I want to move, there is a question about some helpful suggestions, and we do have a list put together that we'll get to here in just a couple of moments. I want to reflect though on one other conversation that all of you are engaged in, and that's discussion around change and opportunity with law enforcement and the justice system as a system. Isaiah, you convene conversations constantly. Cheryl, your work is all about it, and Betty, you're engaged at a state level and locally. Can you just talk a little bit more about the relationship building that you're all doing to move towards some change that's needed?
Well, one of the things that I said earlier that we were doing is we were having peace circles, and those circles were with youth of color, normally African American, and 90% of them were male, and police officers, and we would be in a circle and talk. The only person that could talk was the person who had whatever the piece was in their hand. Out of those circles came tears, and I'm not talking about just on the youth part. We had officers in tears, we had youth in tears, we had laughter. The thought that everybody was a human being that was in that circle, that a lot of them had been through the same kind of situations, that was something that was just kind of unheard of. We've also been part of, well, we've kind of backed out of it, the Second Chance program, where we were doing mediation. And with that mediation, if they came out of that mediation okay, what our thing was, don't take them any farther into all these different things that they had to accomplish so that they didn't have a record. And when we were doing it with just the mediation, we had a 92% rate where our youth did not get in trouble again. The thought that they were having mediation with the community, with an officer, with whoever it was that was harmed, whether that be a grocery store, and a kid down the street finding out that, you know what, if you shoplift from the store, then your grandmother can't get to that store if they close it. It was a different way of approaching things. Instead of automatically giving a child a record, it's like, let's work through something else. And it worked. Our recidivism rate, or whatever it is that you want to call it, like I said, was 92% of our kids did not have any trouble again. And they appreciated the fact that, wow, that affects my grandma, or that affects my community. If I'm stealing from this store, and let me give a little story. We had a young lady who was stealing a shirt from one of the thrift stores on 6th Avenue. Now, if you're going to steal a shirt from a thrift store, you're probably in need. Well, the thrift store called the police on her, and instead of her getting a record, we came in and did a mediation. The young lady was surprised to find out how that could harm other people who use that store. The store manager was surprised at how wonderful this young lady was. Long story short, when it was over, they offered her first a letter of recommendation, the manager did, from the store, to get a job somewhere else, and then they offered her a job.
Wow.
And as far as I know, she's
happen all the time, Cheryl.
No, it doesn't. When the Kmart was on Hubble, we had someone who had shoplifted. They could have ended up in jail or in Myra Hall or whatever. But because of the mediation, the young lady ended up with no record. So it works.
Well, I do think the relationship building is helpful to get some movement. And Isaiah, can you reflect a little bit on some of the relationship building and the conversations, the hard conversations that you're helping to ensure take place?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, so one of the things that I wanted to do during the transition from Wayne Ford as executive director to Isaiah Knox as executive director is make sure that we were getting police and the community out of their cars to have positive interactions. When we first started having them, there were many people in our community that would not attend because police were present, or question the motives of the police being there, which is very well understood with the history of policing in America since 1619, right? Since the slave trade, since as long as we can remember. So it took a lot of time and a lot of consistency to continue to have those events. And we had 40, 50 events in-person events before COVID, and we still had 31 events the first 6 months of this year. We moved a lot to virtual. But to get the police out of their car into the community is very important. And it's probably one of the reasons why we had less of destruction, let's put it that way, more opportunity to move the needle with policy. Even though I see Bob has put in here, we haven't gone all the way with policy, and Betty knows we haven't went all the way with policy, but we came to a good tipping point where we knew there was an urgent need now because of the relationships that we have built over the years. And with the trust that organizations like NAACP, Urban Dreams, Amos, and other places have built with community members and with law enforcement and with government officials, elected officials, and with business and industry to say, now's the time, let's move quickly because we are in a crisis to get this thing done. So being out there for those 8 straight nights on the streets, understanding both what was needed by law enforcement and what was needed by the movement to get to a point where we could now have less protest, more progress. I think we've done that successfully, but it wouldn't have happened if we didn't have things like the trunk or treat, where the police come in the community, pop their trunk, and give out candy in the community. And I like to tell this story because the first time we had it and the police were there, one of the neighbors said, "What the F are the police doing here?" And I said, "They're giving out candy just like you." But it took an organization and to say, like Urban Dreams, to bridge that gap, to say it's okay that they're here, it's okay that you're here, we're going to work together. It's also sorry, my Alexa's talking in the background. And then with the community, the car checkup, when we change out all the headlights and taillights of the cars, and we do it with the police, and we do it with Jim O'Halloran and O'Halloran International, because they were concerned, and this is how business and this is how donors can get involved, right? They were concerned, but they didn't understand how to really dig deep into the community like Urban Dreams does. So the O'Hallorans decided to partner with the police and Urban Dreams because they had the resources and they had the experts that can come in and change out all the headlights and taillights, so we don't have any stops for a broken taillight, a broken headlight that always escalate either to more negative interactions. They always escalate to a negative interaction, right? If you get pulled over by the police and you're in the community, it's a negative interaction, period, because you don't want it. No one wants to get pulled over. But those also often escalate into more tragic situations that we've seen over and over and over and over again. Castile in Minneapolis was kind of the catalyst for that program to even get started, when he had a legal firearm, told the police, and the police still shot him and killed him because he got pulled over for a taillight being out. So those are the kind of things that we've been working on over the years with NAACP, with other partners, to make sure that we're having as many positive, and we're not moving the needle, right? We've only moved the needle from that more people trust the police, less people try to avoid the police, and it's going to be a slow thing, but it's going to take everybody in the community.
Thanks for those examples too, Isaiah. I think the one about the car opportunities, I can't remember what you call it now, is a really important one, because again, it understands like what are some of those whys, where are some of those interactions, and how can we help position those differently and build those relationships, build those opportunities to interact. I'm gonna ask Tom to pull up the slides, because what I don't wanna miss is just an opportunity to share with everybody a compiled list of things in terms of action. You know, as we said at the beginning, there's conversation could happen like this for hours, for days. And this is 1 hour of time to give you things to think about. But more importantly, we want to give you some suggestions of things to do. So thanks to the 3 panelists and many others, here's some advice that was collectively shared. One thing that was shared was just be okay with being uncomfortable. This conversation is not a comfortable one all the time, because you may not know what you're saying, you may not know how to ask it, and Isaiah and I know have had many conversations about this, and it's most important that you're okay with being uncomfortable and asking and helping to inform yourself. And of course, one of those great ways to do that is really learn more about racial justice. There are many podcasts, books, articles, one-on-one conversations. The 3 panelists today have had numerous discussions in the community and thankfully make themselves available to continue to have those important conversations. Let us know if we can help connect you. We'll send out the book list that Isaiah shared, but get educated about the information. The other thing is learn more about programs and how you can support those efforts. Just looking at the three initiatives here today, join the NAACP. Volunteer with Urban Dreams. You heard the slate of programs that are offered in the region. Let's Talk, the restorative justice circles that were referenced, all volunteers. So whether you have time to just join in membership or sweat equity hours that you can put into working on the ground, these are just three of many organizations to do this. Also, use your platforms to advocate. And I think you heard today, advocate the questions about where racial equity exists, advocate for the work that you see can help change trajectories, reach out to Betty and ask to learn more about their legislative platform. But certainly, whenever there's an opportunity for a policy, for a program, for a change, ask about how a racial equity lens has been used. There's the For Equity tool. That is an incredibly helpful one. Use it. Please use it. We need our community to be using it. And of course, financial and social connections are critical. So, there are many organizations, here's three, that you can certainly engage with. I think Be a Stop Sign was a great one that Betty lifted up. And just the idea that you can be a part of stopping misinformation, you can be a part of pausing conversation. Just see yourself as someone who's able to do that and someone who the community needs to do that work. Tom, on the next slide, we have a couple of more suggestions. I think this is also really interesting too, and thanks Cheryl for recommending this one. Stop saying this is a good school or good neighborhood, or this is a bad school or bad neighborhood. The impact of those statements is beyond significant. And we all have a role and an opportunity to change how we are talking about a community that we all love. The next one around give and ask others to join you. Invest in organizations that are led by and serving people of color. We can help connect you. We can help brainstorm with you. Several of these programs, including Let's Talk, Urban Dreams, and some of the work that Betty is engaged with, have all been funded by donors at the Community Foundation. Let us help connect you to things that you care about, and these might be some of that work. I would also say one of the things that we or the panel would like to share is talk to people about where you're investing. If you are investing in issues of social justice, if you're investing in some of the things shared today, please talk to others about why and what you're doing to make a difference in your charitable giving. Engage in those policy efforts. There are a lot of them that you can engage with, and we'll send follow-ups so that you know how to get a hold of Betty's work as well as the others. And then lastly, I feel like as Cheryl kicked off our conversation, I just want to reflect. Show a person, a young person of color, that they matter and that they're valued. Formal and informal actions are critical and they matter, and we're each able as an individual to find ways to bring that to life for people, and especially young people of color in our community. Just want to give our panelists, thanks Tom, you can take those down now and put our panelists back up. We have just a couple of more moments to share, but I just want to give you each just one last minute to reflect on what you would like to challenge the individuals joining us today related to justice for all in our community.
Well, it looks like I'm unmuted, so I'll go first. I just want everyone, basically to say that our kids matter and that they have value. We do Saturday school, and we talk about social issues, and what the kids see on TV and what they see on social media and the things that they hear from adults can tear a child down quickly. So we just need to build them up as much as we can, no matter where they live, no matter what their income level is, and no matter where they go to school.
All right, well, I will quickly take it next. I did want to just answer really quickly one question about what the NAACP is doing with law enforcement. The NAACP meets regularly with law enforcement. We have strong relationships with the police department, the sheriff's department, and that's actually statewide. We also have we co-chair a equity task force with the Iowa Police Chiefs Association. So we're really involved, and we also work with law enforcement because that informs the policy proposals that we put forward. I would say, because we're talking about donors, and I saw a number of questions around how donors can help. Yes, it is so important to look at financing and looking at your funding priorities and making these issues a priority. I was saying earlier that nobody funds this kind of advocacy. And the other challenge is sustained funding. So it's great to have the one time, and we need that, but we really do, because these processes sometimes take, you may not hear about a criminal justice reform effort until it is at the very end of their process. But prior to that, there's been years of work. And I know that I'm a volunteer, and I also volunteer a lot of my business resources for this work. So sustained giving is extremely important. And you can reach me at Iowa, Nebraska, NAACP.org, Iowa, Nebraska, NAACP.org. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll close it out. So Urban Dreams also, we do race-based cultural competency training, and we actually train all the law enforcement cadets in their first year, except for Des Moines and Cedar Rapids, because they have their own academies where they do the training. So every cadet throughout the state of Iowa. And also we do it for business industry. So bring us out there, do that, educate yourself, ask questions, be very uncomfortable, read a lot, listen to 1619 podcasts, do all these things that are important to understand, and know that you're not going to understand, and that's okay. And continue to reach out and expand your network so that you can understand. And then obviously support with your dollars. We appreciate those. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time and your passion, and most importantly, your commitment to the entire community and bringing these kinds of conversations to the places where they need to be heard in different ways and in deeper ways. So appreciate all of you and what you're doing. As a follow-up to today's session, just a reminder, we will send out a recap with many of the links that were discussed, with information on how you can connect with these three individuals. And always the Community Foundation staff stands ready to learn alongside with you and to connect you to causes that matter most to you, and make those introductions. So thanks again for joining us, for taking time out of your day, and for joining us in the commitment to really having a community that is better together. Thanks again, be safe, and hope to see you all again soon. Bye-bye.